I'm Adria Scharf. I'm an associate director at the Institute for the Study of Employee Ownership and Profit Sharing at the Rutgers University School of Management and Labor Relations, and we are so pleased to be co-hosting this second annual Employee Ownership Ideas Forum together with our really incredible partners at the Aspen Institute Economic Opportunities Program. Having participated in some of the planning conversations, it was just extraordinary this morning to listen to the richness of the morning panels. I am excited to continue, and I think we'll probably pick up on some themes that have already been surfaced so far today with this next session on employee ownership in strategic industries and supply chain resilience. And we have with us here today a really extraordinary panel of company leaders, all leaders of employee-owned companies, who I'll introduce in just a moment. But this sort of idea of the relationship between employee ownership and the importance of strategic industry and supply chain resilience, those ideas are critically important, but they're kind of underexplored, what the specific relationship is between employee ownership and these very important concepts. We've learned as a society over the last several years, the consequences of supply chain fragility for our public health, for our economic functioning, for our national security, and I think there's a growing convergence of an understanding of the absolute importance of our investing societally in our critical industries and protecting supply chain resilience. And each of these extraordinary panelists will help us kind of learn about the role of employee ownership in the context of these concepts here today by sharing their stories and experiences. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, again, all leaders of employee-owned companies. And I'll start closest to me here with Mowa Haile, CEO of Apex Underground and president of Sky Blue Builders, so leader of 2 employee-owned companies. And then we have Rick Plimpton, CEO of Optimax Systems Incorporated, Joey Nestegard, CFO of Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories, and Mariann Fuller, CFO of Columbia Chemical. Welcome. Thank you all so much for being here. So I think we're going to start just by inviting you all just to introduce yourselves, introduce your companies, to kind of your approach to employee ownership, just a couple of minutes each. And then once we kind of have that shared background sense for one another, we can kind of dive in more specifically to the topic. So Mariann, maybe I'll start at the end with you.
Sure. As Adria said, my name is Mariann Fuller. I'm CFO of Columbia Chemical Corporation. We've been around for about 50 years, just about to hit our 50th anniversary, employing about 40 employee owners in Cleveland, Ohio. So I'm probably representing the smallest ESOP here today, but we're small but mighty. From our Cleveland, Ohio office, we sell throughout the continental U.S. and into 30 different countries. So we were founded about 50 years ago, family-run business. After the second generation was ready to exit, we explored the concept of employee ownership. We're very fortunate. We've talked a lot today about the importance of state centers. In Ohio, we have one of the oldest state centers located right in our backyard. And our owner, the second generation owner, was humble enough to know and recognize that the employees built the business. He may have been fortunate enough to lead it, but it was built on the employees' hard work. So we started our ESOP transition 20 years ago this year as a partial ESOP, and now we've been 100% ESOP since 2011. Columbia Chemical manufactures chemistry that is sold to plating shops to coat metal, primarily steel, but getting more into aluminum as the market shifts a little bit. Primary function is for rust prevention, but also to give it a specified appearance. We do about 50% of our business within the automotive industry. Our customers plate the interior and exterior parts of cars, things like headrests, seatbelt buckles, brake calipers, general fasteners that go on the car. We're considered a tier 2, tier 3 supplier, but we do get the privilege of working directly with some of the automotive manufacturers because our industries run on specifications and approvals. So we have direct contact with all the major automotive industry leaders. The rest of our business ends up in medical equipment, agricultural equipment, furniture, appliances, anything basically metal that you want to stop from rusting.
Mariann, thank you. Joey, continue down the way.
Hi, my name is Joey Nestegard. I'm the CFO of Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories. We're based in Pullman, Washington. We have about 6,500 employees in about 100 offices around the world. About 5,000 of those are in the U.S. 4,400 or so are in the ESOP. This is our 40th year and our 25th year of being an ESOP and 15 years of being 100% employee-owned. We make products for all utilities and large producers and consumers of power all over the world.
Hi, Rick Plimpton. Thank you for inviting me to be here today. I'm the CEO at Optimax. We manufacture precision optics for research and industry. And just to give you an idea, we're a key supplier to NASA. Pretty much anything they've launched in the last 30 years has Optimax lenses on it. It's wonderful to be part of their success with all the Mars rovers and New Horizons that went out to Pluto and many other missions. Another sector that we serve is semiconductor industry. About 40% of our revenue is historically making optics for semiconductor machines and inspection tools. Maybe you've heard of the CHIPS and Science Act that went through. Our CHIPS, Science and Technology Act promises to keep us busy for many years to come as they build out these new foundries or factories here in the U.S. to manufacture semiconductor chips domestically. Our journey into an EO, we actually did EOT, an Employee Ownership Trust. It started about 10 years ago when my partner and I were trying to figure out what succession plan was going to look like for us, because he's 10 years older than me, so he's 70 and I'm 60 years old now. And when we were looking at what are the important things about transitioning leadership at Optimax, we wanted to make sure that we didn't disturb the culture too much. We've created a culture of open book management. For 30 years, we've been sharing profits with our employees, and we didn't want to see that get disrupted. We wanted to make sure that leadership remained local, and that whatever we chose for succession planning at least laid the foundation for decades of prosperity, and we chose 100 years as our objective. Who knows what the world's going to look like in 100 years. But we ended up with developing a perpetual purpose trust, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the tenets of that and some of the important things that we put in place.
Let me test. Oh, you can hear me. Thank you for having me here. Mowa, Haile, president of Sky Blue Builders and CEO of Apex Underground, because having one job sucks. I am extremely humbled and honored to be here. I am ownership. I'm an example of it. And the reason I say that is my story, I'm originally from East Africa, escaped war, came here on December 18th, 1981, left a world that was of brown earth and brown people. I landed in Denver, Colorado, December 18th, 1981. You figured it out, right? And so to come to this country and have this opportunity, and I think President Obama said it best when he said, "Only is my story possible in America." And so to have this opportunity to be here with you guys today is just truly amazing and humbling. To the opportunity for ownership, I got to learn that early on in my corporate career with stock ownership, strike price, and all those kind of things that I had no idea about growing up, right? Because I just didn't have that opportunity to learn about the stock market. My parents were immigrants working 2 to 3 jobs each to try to make it work for us. And so I am the example of the possibility of ownership. And so when I started Sky Blue Builders back in 2009, I knew that my goal was to eventually have the employees have that same opportunity to own a piece of the company. And so back in 2022, I started selling portions of my ownership to my employees, not through a ESOP program, but I just started selling ownership to some of my employees. And then I read about Apex and Heritage Capital converting Apex Underground to ESOP owned. And this was on the Denver Post. What caught my attention was there's this firm, Apex and Heritage Capital, that was a social impact private equity firm, which is kind of an oxymoron, but I was like, okay, let me test these guys out. So I reached out to them, and after meeting with them on what they were doing, I was very impressed. The impact ownership has in this country is profound. And so between Sky Blue Builders and Apex, we have 140 or so employees, but I always multiply it times 4, right? So that's 550 people that we're impacting, because you're talking about families. So a CEO, it's not just one employee. You think of them as 4. And so that impact is huge. And somebody mentioned earlier the wealth that provides and the generational wealth that it can have. It's profound. And so just between Apex and Sky Blue Builders, that's 560 lives we're going to be impacting for not just years to come, but generations to come. So again, thank you for having me here. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today.
Mowa, thank you for sharing. Let's start digging into the question of kind of supply chain resilience and critical industry. And Joey, I'm going to start with you. We've all heard horror stories about the risks involved with weak supply chains, with fragile supply chains. Can you talk a bit about your experiences with supply chains, resilience, and how employee ownership kind of fits into how you think about it?
Sure. So we make products for the electric power industry. So if you think about the last few years, there was some industries that just couldn't make product, and that was not an acceptable answer for us, because our products keep the lights on and protect the power system. So for years, we've been trying to onshore as much as we could. Our products are complex. They use their electronic devices, computers, if you will, to protect the power system. So coming out of the pandemic, we started to see lead times expand. So we've always used inventory as our friend, which is counter to most business school perspectives. But we also realized that we couldn't wait for suppliers to give us parts. So at one point, we had about half of our R&D group. Instead of doing innovative things, they stopped what they were doing and designed out components we couldn't get for things that we could, just so we could make sure that we could continue to ship and delight and serve our customers. And we didn't have to push people or rally everybody, because we have something called Friday lunch. We have people all over the world, but we have lunch every Friday where we talk about how we're doing. Every new employee gets introduced. I do a financial update and a lot of these things, and we could talk about, hey, this is what's happening in the company. We need to act, and people worked weekends and holidays to do the right thing for our customers. And we started to vertically integrate probably 15 years ago. Heavily. We built a printed circuit board factory with employee owner dollars, not taxpayer dollars, in the United States, so that we wouldn't have to buy things from China. So we've tried everything, and we'll continue to look at ways we can bring things onshore or closer to home. And we're organizing people to do those things, and have been for some time.
Really interesting. Thank you. And I think that what you just said about the flexibility and the willingness of your employees to kind of lean in at that critical moment, it echoed and resonated with some folks on the earlier panel said just before lunch, with Molly Hemstreet and Jenny from Hypertherm talking about the way that employee ownership can provoke that kind of employee commitment and willing to be flexible and to really lean in. And
we used Friday lunch to acknowledge those people and thank them for the sacrifice, and we've had people go up and help in manufacturing, to go up and work through backlogs so that we continue to meet supply chain challenges. It's been pretty remarkable. Nice, thank you. Mariann, you've had some experience with the challenge of meeting the needs of customers during the pandemic. Would you share a little bit about that and how employee ownership factors in?
Sure. So you know the arcade game when you're a kid where the little mole pops out and you whack it and you feel really good about yourself for about half of a second, and then another one pops out, another one. That was kind of our experience throughout the supply chain. Kidding aside, we dealt with price increases, we dealt with stockouts, we dealt with being put on allocation where we normally need 20 drums a month and the supplier has 2 allocated to us, and we dealt with just where they just decided critical raw materials were no longer being manufactured. So it was 2 years of fun for us, but we had a similar approach to what Joey was saying. We compete on customer service, and one of the key components of that is our speed of shipping, where the industry standard's a week or more. Ours is 48 hours or less. Often we gain new business because somebody else can't ship something. It's a high cost of changing in our industry, but when somebody's backed into a corner, they do what they got to do, and that's where we gain business. So we often ship in 48 hours or even same day, next day to keep customers up and running. So prior to the pandemic, similar to what Joey was just saying, we had to look at our supply chain and build our model around that. So we looked for domestic sources that were close by, had a 1 or 2 day transit time. We're willing to keep material on the floor, multiple sources. We really got to know our suppliers, and we leaned on that during the pandemic to get us through. It was certainly a challenging time. I think employee ownership played a big part in that. That effort, which started in 18 and 19, was employee-led from the bottom up. It wasn't a corporate initiative. It was our employees recognizing that the company is built on the customer service, and that comes with the transparency and accountability that ESOPs create. So I think that helped. Doesn't mean there wasn't hiccups during the pandemic. Even with the best preparation, it was whacking that mole all day long. The departments really came together. When you have a normally run company, you have people looking at their own 10 feet in front of them. But when you have 40 employees getting in a room and fighting fires together, you can solve problems. Things just went so much smoother because we were employee-owned, definitely.
Thank you. So Rick, you mentioned supplying NASA. You work on some pretty sensitive optics technology, and I know that your company also provides very high quality, good jobs. Can you speak about the Employee Ownership Trust and how it supports both?
Yeah, so I'm just a foundation. I'm from Rochester, New York. It's a home of Kodak and Xerox. There's a lot of small businesses in our region that have really innovative technology that they've used to create value in the marketplace. And it's not unusual for big conglomerates to come in and try to buy up these little companies to take the technology that they're interested in. And with Optimax, we were founded in '91. In a very small way, we're kind of carrying on that legacy of Kodak and Bausch & Lomb of manufacturing precision optics here in America. And we didn't want some multinational conglomerate to acquire our company and just totally, take what they want. And oftentimes the local Rochester company just gets shut down and we lose hundreds of good jobs in our community. Today, Optimax employs almost 500 employees. And like I said, a lot of what we make is used in the semiconductor market. So let me kind of use that as the basis for talking about supply chain. We're a key supplier to these big corporations that are in the semiconductor market. And every week for several years, I've been getting offers to buy the company, and we always reject them. When we converted to an EOT in 2020, I went out and talked to some of our top customers. And I told them about the new corporate structure that we had, that there's a perpetual purpose trust that now owns Optimax, and Optimax is 100% owned by the trust. And one of the tenets of the trust is that Optimax could never be acquired. And I really didn't know how they were going to react to that, but the beautiful thing is many of them reacted very positively because they were fearful of when Optimax was going to be acquired and how that was going to compromise their supply chain. And now that they know that they can partner with us for years and years, for decades, some of those same customers are now investing in us. They're buying very expensive equipment and putting it in our facility and building stronger relationships with our engineering team and our manufacturing team. And that's a really beautiful derivative outcome that we did not expect.
Thank you for sharing that. So Mowa, let's talk about both of your companies. Could we start, if you're willing, with Apex Underground? I understand that you're working on some water and pipes in the Denver area. Could you speak about how employee ownership helped you win that contract and how it's helping you execute on it?
Yes, absolutely. So at Apex Underground, Denver Water is replacing about 80,000 lead service lines. These are residential lines. If you guys aren't aware, the EPA is mandating that every city and every water district by, I believe, 2035 or 2040, don't quote me on that, they have to replace all the lead service lines. They've set aside $15 billion to do this. And so Apex went after these contracts with Denver Water for 2 years. They didn't win it. After the conversion to ESOP, and I'm not going to just say it's because of ESOP that all these things happen, but I think the team effort was there. So after the conversion, the team went after the contract. It was a 3-year, $25 million, and we won it. We sharpened our pencils. We were strategic about the RFP. We made a big note of the ESOP and the old employee ownership. And so all of a sudden, we were going to double or almost double our revenue in 1 year because of this contract. Our HR team, all of our folks, we had to hire 25 people within 2 months, get them trained. So you can imagine the level of effort that takes. I have never seen anything like this. We got them trained, and now we're Denver Water's #1 contractor. We're replacing 5 to 6 water lines a day. And beyond that, when we talk about the supply chain, the team took it on themselves to say, hey, I think we can take the drilling on internally instead of subcontracting the work. And it made absolute sense. They did the numbers, they did the math, and it made sense. Now they're looking at taking over the traffic control. So we're taking that in-house. Again, the team is taking it on themselves because they are the owners at the end of the day, right? And so now they keep surprising me. It's truly, as a CEO, to not be the one that's like, hey, I got to think strategically. The team is mentally there in terms of employee ownership. And it's only been a couple of years. And now we're teaming with a software company that helps cities find if they have lead in their lines, right? They're doing potholing investigations and tracking this in a software system. The team went to a software company, and now we presented to Colorado Springs how we can help them prepare for lead service replacement lines. And so all that to say, what we've done over the last year and a half has been employee-led, more so than I've seen it. It's not coming from the top down. It's really a holistic approach where the team's coming up with these amazing solutions.
Thank you. So turning to Sky Blue Builders, which is the company that you founded, and you shared a minute ago your kind of personal story about the importance of ownership and kind of your motivation to share ownership with your employees. That was beautiful. I guess could you share a little bit more about employee ownership at Sky Blue Builders and how you see employee ownership kind of supporting where you envision the future for the company?
Yes. So at Sky Blue, it's been 3 weeks since we converted to employee-owned. 3 weeks. So thank you. We just made the announcement right now. So we're at 45 employees, and so not a huge company. But it was an interesting story in terms of last year, early in 23, we were approached to sell the company to somebody else, and we went through an 8-month process. We signed a letter of intent. The company was going to be sold to a larger business. And so thankfully, A&H stepped in to help us convert it to an ESOP instead, so we terminated that agreement. That whole time, it did not feel right, just because we had employees that were with us for 10 years or longer. And so the future of Sky Blue and what was going to happen to it, with all these employees that helped bring it to where it is today, it just didn't sit right. And so with that conversion, it's great to see that 45 employees are going to own it. And the beauty of it is, the company's going from about 20-some million a year in revenue. We're at 50 million in the next 3 years because of our backlog that we have with airport infrastructure work that we do. So if you guys don't know, Denver International Airport is the 3rd busiest airport in the world. And so that type of work, we're doing Colfax BRT, which is a transit system. It's about a $30 million contract. And so the team's taken over at a very opportune time. And so for all of our 45 employees to be able to enjoy in that ownership is absolutely amazing.
Congratulations to all of your employee owners. Very exciting. Rick, tell us more about the future of Optimax, where you see it going, how employee ownership figures into the future.
Okay, so let's go back to, we run the company open book. For almost 30 years, we've been sharing profits with our employees. And just to give you a better picture of that, at the end of each month, we close the books, and within a few days, we figure out how much profit we made, and we give out 25% to our employees. And it doesn't matter if you're the janitor or the president, everybody gets the same check at the end of the month. For the past several years, the average monthly bonus check is over $1,000. So that kind of frames it a little bit for you. So, in my opening remarks, I said one of our goals with succession planning was not to destroy the culture. And obviously, if some big conglomerate bought Optimax, first thing they do is cut off our bonus plan. No company gives away 25% of their profit right off the top to their employees. This is the soundbite I like to give to politicians that'll come out and meet with us and take a look at what we're doing. In the first 30 years of Optimax, we generated about $500 million in revenue. And roughly half of that was shared with our workforce through payroll benefits and bonuses. So $250 million given out to families in our community where they spend it at the grocery store, auto dealership, save a little bit for retirement. With the growth path that we're on, even a conservative growth path over the next 30 years, Optimax will generate over $5 billion in revenue, where $2.5 billion of that is shared with our workforce, creating financial security for the families that we support and strengthening our community. And if we can get even 10 more companies in our community to go the EOT route or ESOP, either way, it's a different, EO, there's different ways to solve the problem or to create a solution for the organization. I don't believe there's a silver bullet that works for everybody or for every company, but to have these hybrid solutions that can be used to strengthen communities across America, I think is an evolution in capitalism that's much needed here in America.
Thank you. Joey, you're next. I know Schweitzer is succeeding, thriving, growing. Tell us what lessons you think there are in terms of employee ownership playing a role in a company's innovation and growth path.
I was smiling when you guys were talking. We're a small company. So I started 22 years ago, and we had 550 employees. And through purely organic growth, we have 6,500. When we became an ESOP in 1994, we had about 25 to 30 employees. So, it just feels growth, right? And so we do everything from inventing, designing, manufacturing, selling, supporting our products. So we have engineers, we have direct labor folks, and we talk about innovation from all of those aspects, and including things like you were talking about the employees. They come up with the ideas that spark things. We've been doing all of these vertical integration activities, and it's usually because somebody has an interest in making something that we buy from somebody else that maybe it's hard to get, or it's low quality, or it's from a faraway land and it doesn't need to be. And another thing, we use what's called world-class manufacturing principles, and it empowers the people on the production floor, those closest to the work, to solve problems, try new things, not be afraid to fail, small reversible experiments. And those are the things our head of our factory says it's heartwarming when you walk out on the floor and something has changed from the last time you went out there and nobody asked your permission to do it. They try it, it works, and it's ended up, we now have 5-day lead times to make high quality, high tech products at a low mix, high mix, low volume in the United States. So it's those sorts of things when you empower people, truly makes a huge difference.
Thank you. Mariann, I know you're in a tough industry where there's been a lot of sell-off. Can you talk about how you've maintained your independence? Share some of that story.
Sure. So our industry has been consolidating in recent years. There's a couple major players that have taken the initiative to buy out a lot of the smaller companies. We've taken the strategy of staying in ESOP. It's definitely where we expect to be in the next 100 years. But one of the interesting acquisitions that occurred probably about 2 years ago, the largest player decided to buy out a fairly good-sized company, but one that kind of competed on customer service. It's not quite ingrained in their culture the way it is at Columbia Chemical, where it's our core values and kind of our competitive advantage. But they did have a customer focus. And this particular acquisition, they did it so that they can buy out a monopoly. I mentioned our automotive sector runs on approvals. Well, one way to get more work through approvals is to buy out the other person on the approvals. And now you have a monopoly. But it doesn't work so well. They paid a huge premium for it. And what they found was customers weren't happy. They missed that customer service focus. So we're landing, the shakeout of it is landing us a lot of business. We had pretty aggressive growth goals to begin with, and now those are accelerating. So I'm excited to see what kind of wealth we can build in the next few years for our employee owners. We have a young workforce. I think we'll have our team in place for many years to come. And we're also looking to go on the other side and start acquiring people. I mentioned earlier wanting to shore up our supply chain. We've got a great plan in place for some vertical integration, and that we can, if we need to have that speed of service on the supply chain, part of it might be buying into joint ventures or acquiring our supply chain. So we're definitely going to look in that in the future. We've done a few small acquisitions, but we're just waiting for those to fall in place.
Interesting. Thank you. Let's see here. The topic of reshoring was brought up maybe by Joey a few minutes ago, but let's just turn to that for a minute. And this may be a question primarily for Joey and Rick, but everyone is welcome to chime in. Can you speak, can you speak about reshoring? In other words, kind of the idea of the importance of bringing critical industry, critical pieces of a supply chain back into the United States. And I'm curious to hear maybe first from Joey and Rick, and then also from Mowa and Mariann, if you have more to add on this topic of reshoring and its connection to employee ownership.
So we've tried to use, so we take great pride in being a U.S. manufacturer, right? And our customers rely on us for products, and so we want to make sure that we can deliver. And the longer the supply chain, the harder that can be, right? And we learned many of those things during the pandemic where we thought we had done a really great job and we hadn't. So we've been trying for as long as I can remember, and I've been there 22 years, to bring components closer to home. And we actually organized a group whose job it was to identify parts based on risk and how they could bring them closer to home, whether that was working with another manufacturer to bring them from Europe or wherever, or whether we needed to vertically integrate. And being an ESOP founded by an engineer who's never taken a business class in his life, who's a business genius, though, he is an anti-Jack Welch person, and he, instead of when in doubt, ship it out, he says with a grin, bring it in. And so we've really embraced that, and we get high quality, low cost products that our employees are excited to make. Things you might not even think of: sheet metal parts, possibly even screws, printed circuit boards, you name it. We're trying to do it. Furniture, everything.
So when I think about reshoring, let's stick with the CHIPS Act analogy. Intel got an award through the CHIPS Act about 2 weeks ago, $8.5 billion. Sounds like a ton of money, but for that 8.5 from the federal government, Intel committed $100 billion, and that's to build 4 new factories in the U.S. I forget exactly which states they are. New York was not one of them. I was a little disappointed. Reshoring can be crazy expensive, and it's not going to happen without support from the federal government. I'll give you another example from my industry, the precision optics industry. In the early 1900s, when the U.S. Ended up in a world war, we were cut off from the supply of precision glass from Germany. And so the federal government went around to select areas, Rochester was one of them, and convinced companies to, well, actually provided financial support for companies to stand up foundries to make precision glass here domestically. Unfortunately, all of those foundries have been shut down. So here we are in this century where optics is the enabling technology, and precision optical glass is so critical to so many of the things that we use every day, including our cell phones, and medical instrumentation and all sorts of other things. And yet we are not making the fundamental raw materials that are needed to support that industry here on our soil. So I'm not sure how to tie this back to to employee ownership. I think I got lost there, but that's a pet peeve that I have. All right, I'll say this. Employee-owned companies tend to be much more innovative than command and control companies. And we've experienced this over and over at our company at Optimax. And the reason is because in employee-owned companies, a greater percentage of the employees are engaged in trying to create solutions that help grow the company, help create jobs, and help create greater financial security for the company and their families.
Thank you for that.
Ta-da.
Any other thoughts on reshoring, Mowa, Mariann, anything?
I'll just add, in addition to what we've talked about already with, having control of the speed of service because you've got your supply chain close to home, we found great benefit in the quality in having your materials manufactured in the U.S. Our industry is battling, raw material changes are causing things to behave different in the chemical baths. So we've actually brought in some of the reactions that we would previously buy, either from U.S. sources or even overseas from China. We actually manufacture it in-house, and we've brought that part of our supply chain in-house, done some innovative things led by our employees in terms of the reaction to not only be able to do it, but to be able to do it in an 8-hour shift and be able to create this reaction that not only meets our internal demand, but that we can also resell. So we've approached it from the quality side as an advantage as well.
Interesting. Touched on this briefly already, but all of these incredible examples of kind of employee innovation, employees willing to go above and beyond and do the kind of almost impossible. To me, it points to the importance of retention. I mean, if you don't have those workers retained, you don't get those kinds of results. And I know the academic research, which I'm most familiar with, has consistently pointed to the very strong effects of employee ownership on reducing turnover, reducing quit rates, also reducing layoffs. And a couple of you mentioned this briefly, but I'm curious if any of you could speak to that, to what extent do you see employee ownership, maybe not alone, but employee ownership as a piece of your overall kind of employment model playing a role in retention? Do you find that you're outcompeting competitors on retention, especially in the context of the Great Resignation, et cetera?
So Michael was here from Black & Veatch. I don't know if he's still here. We actually compete with Black & Veatch and some other ESOP companies. So that sort of levels the playing field for that. But that tells you something about our industry. I think I'll flip it. Instead of retention, we've been able to hire when the whole world was having help wanted signs and all those things, because I think ESOP companies treat their employees better than non-ESOP companies. I don't know how else to say that. We had a hiring event in 2022. We needed to hire 100 direct labor people. We had 500 people line up in the rain to interview, and we ended up hiring almost 200 people to work on our manufacturing floor when every headline on the national press was that you can't find people. Oh, and we live in a rural community in the middle of wheat fields in eastern Washington. So we treat people better than other business models, I think.
Yeah, and I'm fairly new to the ESOP world, but I can tell you from Apex, when we got that Denver water contract, and we had to hire, I think, 25 people within 2 months and get them trained. And so you're talking about in Denver or Colorado or in the U.S. where you have low unemployment in the 3% right? And so this was in 2022. And when others were struggling to hire, Apex had no problem hiring. And I also had Sky Blue Builders at the time, so I saw the difference. And so the only rationale that I could come up with, or the reasoning, was because of the ESOP. We were able to tell employees that they were going to be working for an employee-owned company. And then, of course, the Denver water contract, which gave you security, right, in terms of it's a 3-year contract. So they were guaranteed work as well. And so from what I've seen in my short time, I think it's very beneficial for employee hiring. And I think retention too, but again, I'm fairly new to the ESOP world, so.
At Optimax, we have a wellness team that makes sure that our employees have a good work-life balance. They look at things like career development, personal financial security, emotional, social, and physical well-being. And, I think it's, with employee-owned companies, the employees have greater opportunity to share their opinions or their ideas or their tensions that they're struggling with, and for those issues to be heard and dealt with. A few years back, Maureen invited me to participate on the Job Quality Initiative at the Aspen Institute, and then a couple years later I was invited to work on a committee for the U.S. Department of Commerce and Labor that developed the Job Quality Toolkit, which is a issue. It's posted on the NIST website. But the Job Quality Toolkit doesn't provide answers for business leaders, but provides guidelines and 8 pillars of what it means to create good jobs. And that's what it's really all about. We want to be creating good jobs and strengthening our communities. And even if you're doing really well by your employees, if you take a look at the Job Quality Toolkit, there's probably areas that you are doing well, and then there's other areas where you could make improvements. And it's just a good way to do a self-assessment and see where there's opportunities for improvement.
Just picking up on that, we've heard throughout the panel, each of you have kind of shared a little bit, I feel like, how employee ownership kind of fits in the context of some of your other approaches to management, to the employment relationship, even to operations, with the Friday lunch, with work-family balance, et cetera. And sometimes researchers were curious, how can we sort of unpack these things? Because we see how employee ownership, on the one hand, it can kind of cohere and reinforce all of these other kind of good jobs practices, high job quality practices. And there's something that employee ownership adds above and beyond. For one thing, the wealth accumulation that employee ownership can deliver. But I'm curious if anybody else on the panel has additional thoughts on how employee ownership specifically kind of adds value to what is otherwise a high road employment model that you offer, a respectful job place. And to what extent does employee ownership kind of create synergies with those other practices? And like, if you removed employee ownership, what would be missing? Any additional thoughts? And I'm going a bit off script here.
Well, I'll tell you, with my company, for the first 30 years of the company, we averaged 25% revenue growth per year, and with decent margins or profits. And about 5 years ago, we put in place a younger leadership team, and they've been operating the business for 5 years, and they've increased the value of the company by 4x in just 5 years. It's just because of the employee ownership component and them seeing the potential for growth, where we thought we were being aggressive at 25% revenue growth, and they took it to a whole new level. So it was really beautiful to see how, when getting the younger team even more engaged in the leadership of the organization, was a way to grow the business even faster. And it was because one of the things I didn't anticipate was their sphere of influence is so much broader than the original executive team of just 4 people. And so that younger team just took it to a whole new level. And
did having the employee ownership trust help sort of like amplify their vision in terms of spreading it out and getting the buy-in of the whole?
Yeah, because they knew they and all their peers, they knew they were going to be sharing and where we were going.
Right. Thank you.
I think because we're an ESOP, our employees are really interested in the company and the industry. They understand the role we play. The connection to our purpose and our customers that we serve, I think is greater because we're employee owned than if we weren't. I worked for a software company before I worked at SEL and was privately held, and I couldn't have told you the mission statement or connected with you in the purpose. And I remember being interviewed, and the person who interviewed me could rattle off the mission statement and the values off the top of his head, and I'll never forget that. And I think that's because we're employee owned.
It's been interesting running two companies, one that's employee-owned, and then the other one, Sky Blue Builders, at the time wasn't. And so you could tell the difference just in terms of, at Apex, the people were very hungry because they were owners. They wanted to get leadership coaching, development. They were very engaged in their work and how to improve things. They were also more involved in the community because they saw Apex as their company. And so whenever we had community events, they were the ones that were volunteering more often to represent the company and go out there. And again, Sky Blue Builders is a great company, but as much as I try to do in terms of getting them more engaged in the community and leadership and those kind of things, the end of the day, not all of them were owners, right? We had 5 total or 6 total owners at the time. We had 40-some employees. And so you can see the difference in the dynamics when it's at Apex and it's employee-owned. They're just a lot more engaged across the board, whether it's in the business as well as in the community.
No, I think they pretty much covered everything with that one.
Great, fabulous. Great. Well, let's turn to the audience. We have a few minutes for some audience questions. Anyone, you can direct a question to an individual panelist or to the group as a whole. Is that Evan back there?
Oh, I can grab her.
No, hold on. There's somebody back there. I think I don't have my glasses on.
No, you don't.
Somebody. Mary, you start.
All right, I
Okay,
can
Mary
talk loud.
first, and then, okay.
This is really interesting. Thank you. First of all, thank each of you. These are great stories and appreciate you taking the time to be here and share. For Rich and Joey, what I see as companies grow, the challenge to retain that culture and keep that level of engagement and avoid entitlement by the employee owners. And it sounds like you each have such rich cultures in spite of your growth. I would love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And what we've experienced at Optimax, about every 120 people we add, we really have to buckle down and reinforce corporate culture. So we have, in terms of training, we have technical training, cultural training, and leadership training. And where'd you go at the end of that question?
Oh, how do you keep it?
How do we keep it? Yeah, so the cultural training has been the most challenging, and we actually have in-house, we have a cultural ambassador now that it's her job to just run cultural trainings year-round.
So that at the growth rate we have in this size, we are about 50% of us have been with SEL for less than 5 years, right? So, and that's been that way since as long as I've been there, right? So it's always been a challenge. So we use Friday lunch. It's expensive to get everybody to shut down the production line, to get everybody together, to share the program, to record it, have everybody around the world watch it. But it's invaluable for Dr. Schweitzer to be able to get up and tell stories, for us to be able to get up and tell stories, for us to talk about challenges. We goof up and we talk about it, to talk about our customers, and we have to continue to do that forever. And that, I'm an accountant by trade, and I spend 98% of my time talking to people. So but you just have to do that. That's the focus, and that's something we've been working on for a long time, and we'll continue to work on forever.
Julian McKinley.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for sharing your stories. It was really crystal clear the impact that employee ownership has had in your businesses. I have 2 questions. One is pretty short. Where is employee ownership in your marketing hierarchy? Is it front and center for you? Is it something that you're very vocal about as a company, not just internally but externally? And then I'm curious to hear a little bit about what your competitors are like. What is their response to witnessing your success? And also maybe even just companies who maybe they're not your competitors, but they are within your communities. When they see your success, are they curious about the structure? Are they critical? What are some of the things that you're hearing?
I can tackle the first part of that question, I guess. I wear the HR hat as well. Our hiring, everything we do is tied to our company core values. We use a program called EOS, an Entrepreneurial Operating System, which works really nice with the ESOP culture. It's all about creating accountability and driving towards your growth goals. So we use that. We do quarterly reviews of our employees based on meeting the core values. We hire by it. We fire by it. It is so ingrained in our culture from the day one interview. We have an entire core value. We only have 4, and one's built around ownership mentality and those ESOP intangibles in terms of teamwork, and we have one on innovation, which we've talked about quite a bit here, and customer focus. So our entire process is around that. We do a lot of profiling, personality profiling, to make sure they fit as part of our ESOP and part of our team. And we started from first interview through the hiring process. We involve as many employee owners as we can We take them on tours and they talk to our employees, and that's one of the things they comment on the most is that your employees really like working here. So yes, that's why we take you around to talk to them, so you can see that in action, right? It's one thing to sit in an interview and everyone says, "Oh, I love my job," but when you see, you walk around, they're excited to tell you about what they do and learn about you as a candidate that's coming into our family. It really shines in our interview process.
Yeah, we talk about employee ownership when we interview candidates. It's prominent on our website. It's on probably every piece of marketing literature we have. So we have a few business lines. Some of them services companies like Burns and McDonnell and Black & Veatch are also ESOPs. There's our founder is a third generation entrepreneur. His grandfather's company is also an ESOP, also in our industry. So there's some other ESOPs that understand the power of being an ESOP. We also compete with really large publicly traded companies. And because of the ownership as a value for us, one of our 9 values, and our focus on customers and the way that you call SEL, a person answers the phone, it's not a machine, right? The little things that we do that add up makes it so those big publicly traded companies, they can't compete on service and value, quality, all those things that we hold, so they've got to go after price. That's how they have to react.
It's from a marketing perspective, it's definitely front and center, 100%. When we go after proposals, it's in our cover letter, especially more recently with DEI and equity from the federal perspective or public projects that we chase. They love seeing things like that, right? Even private sector companies are starting to wanting to see things like that, and so it's definitely something that we talk about. And I think, quite frankly, it's helped us win some contracts. But from a competitor perspective, I do not know. I can't address that question.
So it's a great question because we're still wrestling with it. We tend not to talk about an employee ownership trust or a PPT on our website because it tends to create more confusion than it's worth. ESOPs have been around a while, so I think they're better understood in the marketplace. But for years, we've hired people based on their attitude as opposed to aptitude or skills, because we know we can teach the skills. If they're the kind of people that want to work and learn and better themselves and be part of a high performance team. And actually, one of the kind of interesting points about our workforce, over half our employees are musicians. We found a really great correlation between people that, doesn't matter, you could be homeschooled or university educated in music, but you have a lot of gifted traits that we can use that we can leverage to help you learn how to make precision optics and be part of our team.
It's a musical optics company. Additional questions or comments? Daniel.
Have you ever had a down cycle or a down year, and how did you address it? And if not, how will you?
All right, so 0809, I think anybody that's been in business since then had a pretty tough year there. At Optimax, what we did was we reduced everyone's wages by 10%, and the leadership took a bigger haircut. We put a priority on keeping the team together. Someone else earlier today talked about that, the importance of keeping the team together. And in employee-owned companies, I think the workforce has a greater appreciation for that. If you're in a command and control, company run by MBAs that are just looking at the bottom line, they're going to be less inclined to do that. They're going to look for ways to make cuts and keep the bottom line in the black. But in fact, when the CHIPS Act came out, as I said, 40% of our business is semiconductor optics. When the CHIPS Act came out 18 months ago, that industry slowed down. All the big boys pulled back. They quit placing orders. They're like, ooh, we got to see how much of this we can get. So we've been a little slow at Optimax for the past year or so. And with my leadership team, I've been having a discussion with them about, are you afraid to run in the red for a few months? Because we know it's going to come screaming back. And, it's just a question of how soon do the orders start rolling in. And so we're really focusing on keeping our team together, keeping the trainings going, taking advantage of this, call it slower time, where we can do training and maybe cross-training, get people learning other roles in the organization. So if if your goal is to keep everyone employed, there's opportunities for work and creating value.
We had a boom in 2022, so we had and a lot of work in the beginning of last year. So we actually sent people from around the company to go help in production. So from vice presidents to accountants to you name it, they went up. About 100 people went up and helped. And then on the backside of that, we've got a little bit of a lull in orders like a lot of companies, and so we've been having folks go from production to help in accounts receivable or IT or the law department or whatever in what we call apprentices, so they get the experience of that job. And then, frankly, those people end up usually getting hired full-time into those roles when they're supposed to go back to manufacturing, so it kind of works itself out. And we've never had a layoff.
These anecdotes about layoffs are extraordinary. In my own qualitative work, doing case study research on ESOP companies, I hear these stories remarkably frequently from ESOP company leaders talking about just the ways that they bent over backwards to retain the entire team, even during periods of considerable downturn. And an important Rutgers Institute study found that during the COVID pandemic, broad-based ESOP companies were 3 to 4 times more likely to retain their staff compared to other similar firms. Mariann, do you have something to add?
Can I chime in here? So going back to the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, we actually gave our employees an option to either take a pay cut or reduce our staff, and they voted unanimously to take a hit to themselves of 10 or 20%, whatever it was, rather than lose some of their teammates. And management really took that to heart, and we kind of lessened that burden when senior leadership took a bigger hit, knowing that our employees were committed to seeing this through long term, and we came out of it stronger for it.
Friends, we have just time for one more question. This gentleman.
Awesome. My question is for Rick. Optimex is the only company on this panel that's not an ESOP. You're an employee ownership trust or PBT. Tell us why you went with EOT as opposed to an ESOP.
Okay, so I looked at EOT or ESOPs early on when we were looking at succession planning, and at first I thought it was wonderful. It was going to work out great for us, but when I looked at some of the things that are possible through ESOP, it didn't hit all our metrics. Like one of the things we wanted was never sell the company, and if you have an ESOP, there actually is an opportunity or scenarios where the company could be sold because somebody's making a big offer. And you have to do what's best for the workforce, at least what seems to be best in the near term. So that was a big no-no for us. But the other thing that's true of our region, our workforce, being in Rochester, we're in the home of Kodak and Xerox, and we have thousands of families in our region where most of their retirement was in corporate stock, and they're not living the retirement they thought they were going to live because companies go through ups and downs, and it's just a reality of business. And so anytime we survey our workforce and we say, hey, do you want a piece of paper with a promise for cash later, or do you want to share the profits as we go? They always say, let's share the profits as we go. And it's kind of interesting. Along with that, we have to do a lot of financial counseling with our team members, our employees. I've had 20-somethings going out and buying $80,000 pickup trucks, and it's like, hey, guys, you got to put something aside for retirement. So we have worked with our workforce, and we have a 401k plan where anyone that works with us for their career has a path to being a millionaire or a multimillionaire. And that's, there's a lot to that, but it's, if you're careful about how you do it, or conscientious about how you do it, you can create a path where every employee can make out well and have a nice retirement.
Nice. Thank you. With that, I'd like to thank could you take another few minutes? Okay. Wonderful. Another. Senator Van Hollen's going to be here in 4 minutes, friends. Let's take one more question then. Anyone having a burning question? Joseph?
I can project if that's okay. So I've had two thoughts kind of listening to this. One of them is about the fact that so much offshoring happened in part because of cost, but in part because of worries about the kind of restiveness of the American workforce, and folks would be agitating for better conditions and things like that. There's not a question so much as that's something that I'm just meditating a lot on y'all's perspective on. That's been really, really interesting to see how that's an asset for you, is to provide that, and that helps your workers. I have a strategic kind of question. What's your annual planning process look like? If you could tell us a little bit about what it looks like to involve the workers, not just in how to optimize a particular contract or how to, over time, make sure that you're bringing more and more processes closer and closer to home, but as you said, things like annual targets and make sure that everyone's financially literate and keeping an eye on them, just like bread and butter stuff, but something I'm thinking a lot about, and you guys seem like excellent folks to ask.
I want to tackle your first comment. So offshoring seems brilliant if you're just looking at the short term. It's a great way to drive costs down, but unfortunately you're giving away your future when you offshore skills and capabilities. It reminds me of in the early days when we were looking at succession planning. The easiest thing for a business owner to do is just clean up your financials and sell to the highest bidder. By far the easiest succession plan. But you're giving away the future when you do that. And so for some business leaders, that's what they want to do, and that's fine. But for us, when we were looking at succession planning, we want to create a legacy, and make sure the company would keep creating jobs in our community and strengthen our community.
So your second question about, so we're a company with a board, accountable to our shareholders, the trust, but we still have a management team. We prepare an annual plan, written plan. We communicate to our employees. We have Friday lunch, which is an easy mechanism for us to talk about what we're doing. We also create a 5-year plan that's part of the evaluation process, and then provide regular updates and check-ins and communication to across the company about how we're performing, so they know, in a week or this Friday or next Friday, I'll update through Q1 on how we're performed, what we're projecting, what actions we need to take. And we sort of do it in we have a monthly process that we just roll into an annual plan, so it's not really a big production for us. But we do strategic planning and that sort of thing, figuring out how we can double twice in 10 years profitably again.
So at Apex, for the first time ever, we had what we call the summit. It's a full-day event. First half of the day is a year in review. We talk about what we did well, how we performed, what we could have done better. Second half is a 3-year out, which is talking about the next 3 years and where we're going to go, not only in terms of revenue, profits, but also systems and processes. What can we improve on? And that's shared with mainly the management team. So once that's completed, then we had a half-day session with majority of the employees to give them the debrief on how we did and what we're going to do looking forward. And so it's a little more intensive than your normal, like, hey, it's just the management team, and here's what we're going to do. This is a combined team effort.
Interesting. I was curious, did you have something to add, Mariann? I was curious, Joey mentioned a couple times how SCL's primary competitors, including Black & Veatch, Burns McDonnell, seem to all be ESOPs. And I'm curious about, for some of the rest of you, and thinking in the context of the silver tsunami and the importance of, silver tsunami in the manufacturing sector specifically, and in the context of our conversation of supply chain resilience. Curious about, do any of the rest of you see a similar pattern? Do you see more interest in employee ownership? Do you see key competitors adopting our employee ownership? Or are you really sort of the thought leaders in this area? And do you see some potential for developing increased interest among your peers?
So for our industry, no, our competition is not going ESOP. I mentioned we focus on customer service, whereas a lot of the competition does not. It's private equity and large conglomerates. But we are seeing is, and maybe this is just our natural desire to partner with them, but a lot more of our suppliers are ESOP, or at least partial ESOPs. And that could just be, ESOPs gravitate to each other, similar philosophies and ways of thinking, and and partnering, but we have seen that quite a few of our suppliers are now ESOPs.
The thing that I've noticed, the trend that I've noticed is pre-pandemic, we came through decades of too many workers, not enough jobs, right? And then in the pandemic, the pendulum shifted. And now we're in an era where there's too many jobs, not enough workers, and that's not going to change. So the trend that I am seeing is that companies that are creating good jobs are having the most success at recruitment and retention. And that's going to be a challenge for several years.
That's interesting. Mowa, anything to add in your universe in Denver?
Yeah, I think there's a lot in construction, but it's not your typical ESOP. You have to buy into the ownership, and so we are seeing more of it in Denver, though.
Wonderful. Friends, thank you for such a rich conversation. Much gratitude, shed much light. Thank you, audience.